London, 1483. Behind the towering stone walls of the Tower of London, two young boys sleep restlessly. The air is damp, the night heavy with silence. One of them is Edward V, the newly proclaimed King of England, only 12 years old. The other is his younger brother Richard, Duke of York, just 9. Their beds are narrow, their dreams interrupted by the weight of the world they were born into. Neither of them knows this will be one of the final nights of their short lives. In the dead of night, silent figures creep through the corridors. No torches, no footsteps, just the chilling stillness of fate closing in. In a moment of terrifying quiet, pillows are pressed against their faces. The boys struggle, frantic, terrified, but they are no match for their adult killers. Minutes later, the chamber falls eerily silent. 2 lives extinguished. No crowns, no goodbyes. With their death or disappearance, England lost a king who never ruled, and history gained one of its most haunting unsolved mysteries, the case of the princes in the tower. For centuries, scholars, dramatists, and ghost hunters alike have asked the same question. Who killed the child king, and why? Was it their uncle, Richard, the man sworn to protect them? A loyal guardian turned usurper? Or a deeper conspiracy buried beneath Tudor propaganda and whispered secrets? In the cold shadow of power, even royal blood is no shield. And in the Tower of London, ghosts are said to still walk the halls. 2 boys in white, hand in hand. Are they searching for justice, or simply reminding us that in the ruthless Game of Thrones, innocence was always the first casualty? When King Edward IV died unexpectedly in April 1483, England didn't just lose a monarch, it lost its center of gravity. His heir, Edward V, was only 12, a boy with a crown, but no scepter to wield it. The kingdom, meanwhile, was a powder keg waiting for a spark. By law, the young king would reign, but the true reins of power were handed to his uncle, Richard, Duke of Gloucester. Named Lord Protector in the late king's will, Richard had a reputation for loyalty, a capable commander who had governed the north with quiet efficiency. At least that was the portrait painted while Edward IV lived. But loyalty in the world of Plantagenet politics was less a virtue than a currency, and its value changed rapidly. As the boy king made his way from Ludlow Castle toward London for his coronation, rival factions began closing in. The Queen's family, the ambitious Woodvilles, were maneuvering to seize power, hoping to crown Edward quickly and sideline Richard altogether. They moved fast, too fast. On April 29th, at the market town of Stony Stratford, Richard intercepted the young king's escort. He arrested the boy's maternal uncle and half-brother, effectively decapitating the Woodville power structure in one stroke. He then took custody of Edward and escorted him to London, not as a prisoner but as a protector. To the public, everything still appeared orderly, but behind closed doors, lines were being redrawn. The protector had outplayed the Queen's family. Now he controlled the king, and through him, the throne. Yet a question hung in the air, like the fog over the Thames. Was this the act of a loyal uncle shielding his nephew from courtly vultures, or the first calculated step of a usurper cloaked in duty? As Edward V was placed in the Tower of London, officially to await his coronation, few noticed the quiet tension curling at the edges of the court. The corridors of power were shifting, and in the heart of the capital, a young king sat behind walls not of celebration, but confinement, and somewhere in the silence, Richard waited. The Tower of London, once a royal residence, now loomed like a stone sentinel over Edward V's fate. Officially, he was there to await his coronation. That was the story. But weeks passed, then months, and the crown never came. Behind the high walls, the young king grew quieter, less visible. Meanwhile, his mother, Elizabeth Woodville, took sanctuary at Westminster Abbey, clutching her remaining children close, especially her youngest son, Richard, Duke of York. Then came Richard of Gloucester's next move, crafted with the subtlety of a dagger sliding between ribs. He persuaded the Queen to surrender her 9-year-old son. The excuse? The boy king, he said, should not face coronation alone. A brother's presence would comfort him, and so reluctantly she let him go. 2 royal children now slept in the tower, side by side, but not as guests, as pawns. Almost immediately, the air in court grew colder. Without trial or defense, Lord Hastings, one of the late king's most loyal advisors, was dragged out and executed. His alleged crime? Conspiracy, no evidence, no delay, just the swing of an axe. Then from the pulpit of St. Paul's Cross, a sermon ignited like wildfire. A clergyman declared that Edward IV's marriage to Elizabeth Woodville had never been legal. Supposedly, the late king had promised himself to another woman before taking Elizabeth as queen. If true, that meant his children, Edward V and Richard, were illegitimate bastards. And in one breath, the heir to the throne was transformed into a child with no claim, no title, and no future. But who stood to gain from such a revelation? The answer, unspoken yet increasingly obvious, was already circling. Richard of Gloucester. With the princes now branded as impostors, only one man remained worthy of the crown, and he wore the protector's robes. The streets of London buzzed with uncertainty, suspicion. A coronation had been promised. Now all that remained were rumors, and two boys no one had seen in days. Some began to wonder, was the Tower holding a king in waiting, or captives whose days were numbered? On June 26, 1483, the curtain finally lifted. Richard of Gloucester was crowned King Richard III. The coronation was swift, almost surgical. No pageantry for the rightful heir. No boy king stepping forward to receive the crown that was promised. Instead, it was the uncle, once guardian, now monarch, who stood beneath the golden canopy at Westminster, cloaked in ermine, wielding the scepter. And what of the princes? They were still in the Tower, still breathing, still, technically, alive. Witnesses claimed to have seen them playing in the garden in early summer. Two small figures in royal garb, chasing one another in the shadow of fortress walls. But then, nothing. The sightings stopped. The laughter fell silent. It was as if the earth had swallowed them whole. The disappearance wasn't announced. It wasn't even acknowledged. It simply happened. No funeral, no bodies, no mourning, just silence. That silence was louder than any accusation. Because if the princes had died naturally, of illness, of misfortune, why not say so? Why hide it? Whispers turned to accusations. Some believed Richard had ordered the deaths to secure his throne, removing not just rivals, but symbols of a legitimate past. Others clung to more hopeful lies, that the boys had been moved, hidden, saved. But the truth was unrelenting. Two children vanished under the protection of their crowned uncle. And in their absence, a throne stood suddenly, suspiciously, unchallenged. In royal politics, loyalty is a blade, and often the path to power runs red. Nearly a century later, the Tower of London gave up a secret, if it ever truly held one. In 1674, workers demolishing a staircase within the tower uncovered a small wooden box buried beneath the stone. Inside were the skeletal remains of two children. The nation held its breath. Could these be the long-lost princes, Edward V and his younger brother Richard? The bones were reburied in Westminster Abbey under royal order, marked with names the evidence never truly confirmed. But the mystery didn't die with the burial, it only deepened. The most famous account of their fate came from Sir Thomas More, a Tudor loyalist writing during the reign of Henry VIII. In his version, Richard III sent orders to have the boys smothered with pillows. The killers, two obscure men named Miles Forrest and John Dighton. The middleman, Sir James Tyrrell, a knight who allegedly confessed under torture. But that confession, if it ever happened, was extracted in blood. And torture doesn't yield truth, it yields surrender. So we ask, if Richard III was guilty, why was the evidence so fragile, so distant, so dependent on the pens of those who benefited from his ruin? By the time More wrote his tale, the Tudors had every reason to vilify Richard. They'd taken the throne through conquest, not inheritance. Their claim needed a villain, a monster, to justify the blood. Shakespeare followed, immortalizing Richard as a twisted hunchback, a snarling tyrant who murdered children to snatch a crown. Theater made it gospel. But history, real, documented history, is far more reluctant. There are no official records of the prince's deaths, no signed orders, no reliable witnesses, just two skeletons. a staircase, and the ghost of a question. Was Richard III truly the killer, or merely the perfect scapegoat for a dynasty built on shadows? As suspicion clung to Richard III like damp fog on the Thames, another figure watched from across the channel, far from the Tower's reach, but not from its consequences. Henry Tudor, a Lancastrian exile with a shaky claim to the throne, was living in Brittany. He had lost family, fortune, and homeland during the Wars of the Roses. But with the Yorkist princes out of the way, his path to kingship would clear like mist at dawn. Could he have orchestrated their deaths from afar? It sounds implausible. He wasn't in England. He had no army, but he had allies and ambition as sharp as any blade. Some historians argue that Henry, knowing he couldn't defeat Richard on the battlefield without first eliminating York's rightful heirs, dispatched loyal agents to infiltrate the Tower. Two dead princes meant no rivals, no resistance. Was the future Henry VII a patient assassin in exile, playing the long game from the shadows of Europe? But there's another suspect, closer, deadlier. Henry Stafford, Duke of Buckingham, a cousin to both Richard III and the princes, Buckingham began as Richard's staunch ally. He helped Richard ascend the throne. He silenced dissent. He even may have held custody of the boys for a time. Then suddenly he rebelled. In October 1483, just months after Richard's coronation, Buckingham launched a failed revolt, ostensibly to restore Edward V, but suspiciously aligned with Henry Tudor. Was it guilt, regret, or a cover-up for a darker deed? A Portuguese document discovered centuries later claimed the princes died of hunger in the Duke of Buckingham's custody, starved, forgotten, erased. So the question sharpens. Was Richard III the villain, or merely the fall guy for a plot conceived by two power-hungry rivals, one an exiled noble, the other a traitor within his own ranks? In the Game of Thrones, motives multiply like daggers, and every dead heir writes a cleaner path for the next king. What if the Tower never became a tomb? What if, beneath layers of propaganda, confessions under torture, and theatrical villainy, at least one of the princes survived, and history got it tragically wrong? In the 1490s, a young man appeared in Europe calling himself Richard of Shrewsbury, the lost Duke of York. His name was Perkin Warbeck. He was charismatic, articulate, eerily familiar with the inner workings of the English court, and he claimed he had escaped the Tower as a child with the help of loyal supporters. At first, few took him seriously, but then something unsettling happened. Royal courts across Europe, France, Burgundy, even the Holy Roman Empire, recognized him as the real Richard. They welcomed him, protected him, backed his claim to the English throne. Even Margaret of Burgundy, sister of Edward IV and aunt to the missing princes, openly supported him. Family doesn't mistake blood, do they? Could it be that England executed not an imposter, but its rightful heir? Henry VII didn't take chances. Warbeck was captured, paraded through the streets, and eventually hanged in 1499. His death was swift, his silence permanent. But centuries later, newly uncovered documents suggest Warbeck may have told the truth all along. Historian Philippa Langley, who led the discovery of Richard III's remains in 2012, unearthed records pointing to a covert escape. Notes, accounts, and letters that describe a secret operation to smuggle the younger prince out of the Tower and into Portugal. One alleged account, claimed to be written by the boy himself, details the escape, the fear, and the years spent in hiding under another name. The handwriting is young, the tone heartbreakingly real. If true, it would mean the British Crown executed a man not for impersonating royalty, but for being it. And worse, that the accepted story of the princes in the Tower might be a masterwork of state-sanctioned erasure. One brother murdered, the other buried under a lie. The Tower may hold no bones, but somewhere in history's fog, the truth waits to rise. 5 centuries later, the Tower of London still casts a shadow, not just over the Thames, but over the truth. We still don't know what happened to Edward V and his younger brother. We don't know who gave the order, if an order was ever given. We don't even know if both boys truly died within those cold stone walls. What we do know is this: 2 royal children vanished under suspicious silence. No trial, No tomb, just absence, echoing louder with each passing century. And the world moved on. History crowned Richard III as the villain, a child killer, a usurper with a twisted spine and a darker heart. But who wrote that version? The Tudors, who gained the most by erasing his legacy. Shakespeare, who dramatized propaganda into cultural scripture. Courts, who needed a narrative, not nuance. So ask yourself, did we inherit fact or a fable written by victors? Was Richard III a murderer or the last Plantagenet monarch crushed beneath a well-orchestrated lie? Are the bones in Westminster Abbey truly those of the princes or just convenient relics to satisfy uneasy consciences? And what if one of them lived? In the end, the princes in the tower are more than a mystery. They are a mirror, reflecting the cost of power and how far we'll go to rewrite the past to serve the present. Their story lingers not because it's closed, but because it never truly ended. What do you believe? Was Richard a monster or a man outmaneuvered by history itself? Leave a comment and step with us into the shadows of truth, where kings rise, children vanish, and the silence still speaks.